and right, and action.
The baby oil has been purchased, my Y fronts are on, and I've shaved every hairy inch of my ageing frame. It's time for another WWE video, isn't it? This time we're going to hunch ourselves over the DS touchscreen and get up all close and personal with the man meat, which will leave us all bashed and bruised in the ring. Good lord, I've really tapped into the slutty innuendo of 90s UK game magazines talking about wrestling games today, haven't I? Good stuff. Before we end up having to put this video on an adult site, shall we have a quick look at the WWE era that gave us these three Nintendo DS games, their inspiration then. We are well into the late 2000s and well, the WWE can afford to be really lazy. Its main competitor, WCW, has lost the Buried Alive match some time back and there's no chance it will come back dressed as a dad biker like The Undertaker. Former mid-card star Jeff Jarrett has fancied having a go at the family business of running a rival promotion, that being TNA Wrestling, but TNA Wrestling is about as threatening to the WWE as a chihuahua snarling at a Great Dane. Despite this imperious monopoly, this unassailable position, WWE starts to suffer in quality. Of the Attitude Era, megastars The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin are out of there. Top draw heel Triple H has his nose over the McMahon family table and he's thoroughly exploited it to keep himself high on the card, sometimes a little undeservedly. Kurt Angle has gone on to work with Jeff Jarrett. The Undertaker, well, he's getting on a little bit, and Chris Jericho was still around but had one eye on being a semi-successful rock star. He's better of one of those things than the other, let's just say that. Losing all of that talent must have been an upheaval. That's not to say, though, that the WWE was completely shorn of star power. Two of the previous era's tag team stars, Edge and Jeff Hardy, had become genuinely top-level stars. There was a former indie darling called CM Punk who was starting to get higher up on the card. Rey Mysterio had become a main event star following the death of his good friend, the great Eddie Guerrero. Randy Orton had proven to be a great third-generation talent, and the very top of the card was occupied by two future Hollywood A-listers, those being John Cena and Dave Batista. These were all very talented performers, and yet the quality has still gone down somewhat. It is no longer must-see television. Why is this? Like I said in my opening sentence, WWE can afford and has indeed become very lazy at this point. The widespread nature of the internet has brought with it more distractions for their target audience. There's no doubt about it, but it's not just that Chet in Arkansas is more interested in looking for new pictures of Kelly and Candice Michelle than he has of looking at any of their matches. The issue is that the product just doesn't have any oomph. It's just a little bit dull. Why? Hard to say, but the consensus is that Vince McMahon was neither as motivated or as talented as he'd been at the same point in the previous decade. Hell, the era these games were released in was called the PG era. What an underwhelming and unexciting name. Nothing interesting is going to happen. Show your kids. What makes it even worse is that it was during this era that he decided to bring back ECW, the famously chaotic, violent, independent organisation that inspired a lot of the Attitude Era's more exciting matches. It's hard to argue against the Vince criticism, to be fair, especially when you see that the WWE is now only in the 2020s starting to get to a level of quality, if not quite the popularity, that it had back in the Attitude Era, and Vince is no longer involved in the creative process at all. He's not died or anything, he's just an old pervert who ended up selling the business to UFC owners TKO, who put the now retired Triple H in charge of that creative process. They did have their moments in between then and now, of course. The Summer of Punk and Daniel Bryan's Yes movement were all too brief in the 2010s. It helps that Triple H has a worthy competitor in AEW to keep him on his toes, and that a batch of very decent talent has all surfaced all at once. Of course that helps. So yes, despite the era being a little bit shabby, maybe these DS games could be interesting. It is a touchscreen console, which could, and in the end did, mean we got some fairly novel games that made use of the technology. While they share the same names and box art as their Xbox 360 and PS3 console counterparts, they're actually nothing like those games at all. And somewhat surprisingly for followers of games in the WWE Smackdown Vs Raw series, they're nothing like each other either. Let's start like a good set of guys and gals with the first game on the DS, that being WWE Smackdown Vs Raw 2008, programmed by Amaze Entertainment. One thing you will notice when comparing these titles with their console versions is the noticeably smaller rosters, perhaps understandably. The divas, or women wrestlers, aren't selectable in any of the games, but as we're in the time of Michelle McCool, Layla and Kelly rather than Trish and Lita before them, and the four horsewomen Asuka and Rhea Ripley afterwards, it's not as big a loss comparatively, and they still appear in the season mode as NPCs. The roster in this one is of the top stars of the era, plus a few fillers for balance like Snitsky and Gregory Helms. Yes, that is indeed Ric Flair, the guy who was a bit over the hill when he won the Royal Rumble in 1992 in a game that came out in late 2007. And you know what? I'm still not convinced he's retired now, despite claims to the contrary. The DS even gets their own exclusive character. How is this going to compare with the other exclusive stars? The PSP had Sergeant Slaughter and Eddie Guerrero. What's the DS got? Hardcore Holly. Yay. Oh dear. The first thing that will strike you is the paucity of options. Wrestling game fans were used to hundreds of match options and creator character options by late 2007. But the former on display here is very light and the latter non-existent. There are a few match options and there's a fairly simplistic season mode, which is again a bit thin, but packed full of DS-style operated minigames with which to build your fighter as he works his way to championship gold. How do the matches play? Not great. As an on-paper idea, it makes sense given the format that it will make most of the Nintendo DS's features. The entire match is a series of stylus-operated gesture quick-time events. Don't worry about the D-pad or the buttons, it's all taps and spins. There's an element of strategy to these matches, with stronger moves unlikely to be pulled off until your opponent is softened up like a much-chewed, sweaty dog toy. And basically, it's utterly horrible. It is a terrible idea in practice, no matter how good an idea it was on paper. There seems to be a small number of moves, and they sequence like a gesture-heavy version of one of those Netflix interactive shows like Bandersnatch. It's clunky and takes out so much of what makes good wrestling games fun that I really can't recommend this one at all. Graphically, we're a stage above the PlayStation 1 era, but then the game's moving in specified sequences, so it's not really straining the system. These are essentially just cutscenes. Absolutely not a fan of this one at all. Well done for trying something different, but it's oh so simplistic. And if we're going to rate this game as a wrestler of the era, I'd say it's Domino from Deuce and Domino or The Great Khali, utterly shambolic and terrible. Unlike me, IGN liked the innovation in November 2007. They liked how the game lent itself to the cinematic nature of wrestling and made it a more tactical experience. They did admit it was a bit shallow, but a good starting point. They gave it a 7 out of 10. GameSpot praised the innovation and atmosphere, but said the controls would be something you would have to get used to in their late 2007 review, as they awarded the game a 6.5. Moving swiftly on, and I can't move swiftly enough from that game, onto WWE Smackdown Vs Raw 2009, and Toze Co. have taken up the programming duties for THQ. They will also be responsible for the 2010 version, which we will come to soon, you impatient little pup. The roster doesn't change tremendously between the three games, which is possibly an indication of how stagnant the televised product was at that time. There are some new faces here still, and it's a who's who of forgotten wrestlers. Elijah Burke and Jimmy Wang Yang, anyone? At least in this one you can create a wrestler, and it's surprisingly comprehensive, although there's only a few spaces to save your chosen pugilists. Pick your chosen creator wrestler carefully, like I did with this yellow fella. The match options are still limited, as much like the previous game it's designed for mano-a-mano combat, none of your multi-man matches here. This no doubt pleases Jim Cornette, or it would if it wasn't for the fact he hates video games as a rule as well. The season mode is a bit more involved with this one, with some minor RPG elements as you wander between venues and local businesses, meeting strange near-naked muscle men. And what of the gameplay? Is it a collection of cutscenes again? No sir, it is not. This time you can move your character around the ring with the D-pad, moving around the adversary and attacking them from different angles, just like the big console games. It opens up the action significantly, meaning you're not suffering the dull procession of QuickTime events that afflicted the 2008 edition. You'll still not be using the front face buttons a lot, as the touchscreen is utilised still for your strikes and slams. Now, I do understand that this is the DS, and this is the main gimmick of that format, but just like its big brother the Wii, sometimes the gameplay suffers as a result. It's still finicky, and memorising gestures with the stylus is a clunky mechanic at best. It doesn't always work, and you'll get your lycra-clad bum beaten unfairly to the canvas as a result. There's progress with the control in this one, there's no doubt of that. The graphics are nice for the system, but once again it leaves me feeling a little bit cold. If I was to compare it to any wrestler of the era, I'd say it's probably that Russian Charlie Brooker on the steroids, that being Vladimir Kozlov. IGN actually agree with me in their 7.5 scoring review in November 2008. They said this game needs button control. It's always been about control, always has been, always will be. Next year could be a whole new story though, and it's all about the control. Nintendo Power also spoke of this in their 4 out of 10 achieving 2008 Christmas Holiday Special review. They said the stylus-based grappling system is a neat idea, but the command response is just too inconsistent that the CPU will regularly beat you to the punch. Why not just use the console version's control scheme? Hopefully THQ will give us the answer in next year's edition. And do you know what? In Smackdown vs Raw 2010, they actually did. Yay! The touchscreen is now largely consigned to the dustbin as those forgotten about front buttons finally get their chance to point at the WrestleMania sign for their big push. More in that in a moment. We're still not getting any tag team matches player, which must be frustrating for tag team commissioning GM Teddy Long, who is even in this game as an NPC. There's a new match type added, the ambulance match, which has you trying to force your opponent into an ambulance and paying for American healthcare. Say goodbye to your mortgage, fella. The season mode is much like the previous year's one in its style. You traverse the local city in between bookings, working out in once-a-day mini-games to improve your stats. You try to crack on to your female co-workers, HR be damned, and you pick fights with your male co-workers, HR be double damned. Toze have included a card collecting mechanic in this one, with the cards having uses in the matches. Or so I'm told. I couldn't actually figure out how to use them, but they looked impressive. The gameplay is so much better now. You've got a mini console Smackdown this time that controls much like the PlayStation 1 era Smackdown games. The buttons are responsive and intuitive, and they make sense. They're not quite as expansive as the later WWE titles as such. There's no charging grabs or moves to the outside, but it's perfectly playable. I may seem like a granddad for not liking the new thing of touch controls, and maybe there is a way to make those controls work, but they don't work in a wrestling type environment, at least in what I have seen here. Touch controls have a place, but that place apparently is not in the squared circle. The 2010 version is really good fun as a result of abandoning that innovative approach. The lack of multi-competitor matches is still a huge loss though, so I can't give it top marks, but it's a contender and probably the most playable of any of the games I've covered in any of the handheld Nintendo videos I've done so far. I'm going to say that this deserves to be up there in the International Championship calibre of that era's wrestlers. It is a 2010 era Cody Rhodes. IGN enjoyed the game as well, giving it a 7.9 in their late 2009 review. There are some great improvements being made, they say, and Smackdown on the DS has never been better. The December 2009 Nintendo Power said it has a lot of quirks, that we're familiar with in wrestling games, but it works fundamentally, which means it's a big improvement on last year's effort. They gave it a 7.0 out of 10. And that there then is the Nintendo DS series of WWE games covered. An evolution in trying something new and it failing and then getting back to basics, because ultimately that's the stuff that works. Something that Triple H himself has figured out with the current television product. And if that's too good a metaphor, or too bad a metaphor, I can always end it with a good old-fashioned 90s innuendo. If you like getting pummeled in the ring, grease yourself up and force your massive girth on WWE Smackdown Vs Raw 2010 on the Nintendo DS. There, that's better. Now like, subscribe, and K thanks, bye.